The United States says Israeli settlements are no longer illegal. It reverses 4 decades of US policy. It puts the Trump administration at odds with the international community. So why now and for what reason? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. It's a dramatic shift in US policy and goes against the position taken by international organisations and most other countries. The US says it no longer views the illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank as inconsistent with international law. The Palestinians are furious, and many observers say it makes Israeli-Palestinian peace process even more elusive. It's the latest U-turn on policy by the US president in favour of Israel. Trump recognised Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the American embassy there. He also recognised Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights from Syria. Let's hear what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had to say.
Calling the establishment of civilian settlements inconsistent with international law hasn't worked. It hasn't advanced the cause of peace. The hard truth is, there will never be a judicial resolution to the conflict, and arguments about who is right and wrong as a matter of international law will not bring peace. This is a complex political problem that can only be solved by negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the decision rights a historical wrong.
People of Israel, this is a historic day and another great achievement to our policy. After President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, recognized our sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the US administration has now put an end to the lie that settlements are illegal.
Palestinian chief negotiator Saeb Erekat said the decision was a threat to global security and peace.
Israeli colonial settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, are not only illegal under international law, they are war crimes. And the statement of Mr. Pompeo, the Secretary of State of the United States, is absolutely rejected and must be condemned because once superpowers, once the Trump administration decide to undermine international law, once they become an administration that's pro-Israel's occupation, pro-Israel war crimes, this constitute a major threat to international peace and security. And this is turning the international community from the rules of international law, the rules of solving conflict by peaceful means, into the rules of the jungle.
We'll bring in our guests shortly, but first, FAWCETT reports from West Jerusalem.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu wasted no time in welcoming this announcement from the US administration, saying it righted a historic wrong. The Palestinian leadership wasted no time in utterly rejecting it, saying it was more evidence that the US had lost its legitimacy as an honest broker between the Israelis and the Palestinians. In terms of what it changes on the ground, in one sense, potentially not that much. It very much aligns with US policy under Trump in terms of recognizing Jerusalem, moving the embassy here to Jerusalem, cutting Palestinian aid. In terms of settlement construction, that has been going on apace as well. Just last month, there was the announcement of 2,300 new approvals for housing units in the occupied West Bank. That happens every few months and has been ever since Trump took office. It does do a couple of things, though. It allows the Israelis to point to a divergence in international opinion on the legality of settlement activity inside the occupied West Bank, where previously there'd been a pretty blanket appraisal of that as illegal activity. It also potentially emboldens Netanyahu in the future if he wants to exert more Israeli authority in the occupied West Bank, more Israeli sovereignty. He said before the last election that he intended to annex the entirety of the Jordan Valley and that he needed a mandate from the Israeli people to do so, to seek and get US approval for such a measure. In terms of the motivations for it, well, obviously it helps Trump politically, especially with his evangelical base, and it helps Netanyahu at a very sensitive time here politically. Pompeo said that it wasn't designed, the timing so to do, but nonetheless, Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's main rival is running out of time to try to form a coalition government of his own. This is a big victory for Netanyahu domestically. Gantz himself has approved of this statement, and it allows Netanyahu to drive a wedge between Gantz and the Palestinian Israeli politicians in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, on whom he might have to rely if he wanted to make a minority government before his time runs out. So whatever the motivation behind it, Netanyahu can certainly make big political capital out of it at a very important time. Harry Fawcett for Inside Story, West Jerusalem.
Israeli settlements have long been a very contentious issue. They were established by Israel on land occupied during the Six-Day War in 1967. More than 600,000 Israelis currently live in settlements in the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. They're considered illegal under international law as they violate the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its population to the area that it occupies. In 1978, US President Jimmy Carter concluded that building Israeli settlements was inconsistent with international law. Almost 4 years later, President Ronald Reagan disagreed. And more recently, President Barack Obama broke with the US practice by not vetoing a UN resolution urging an end to illegal Israeli settlements. For more on this, I'm joined by our guests. In Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, columnist at Haaretz News and author of The Punishment of Gaza. On Skype from Harare, Richard Falk, Professor Emeritus at Princeton University. Richard's the former UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. And in Ramallah, NOUR, political analyst and former spokesman for the Palestinian Task Force on Public Diplomacy. Welcome to you all. I want to start with Richard Falk in Harare. What on earth are the White House doing making Israeli policy? Surely that's the question.
There is no coherent, persuasive answer. It would seem that the timing of this shift on the settlements came as a way of helping Netanyahu overcome the political impasse in Israel, but there's no assurance that they even correlated this initiative with anything that adds up to a coherent policy.
But Richard, do you think it's a question of this is a continuation of traditional US policies in a way? It always felt like they would have to accept that these settlements existed and to try and find a legal way of making them legal, or is this a complete about turn?
Well, I'd say it's somewhere in between. I think George W. Bush back in 2004 seemed to agree with Sharon that the settlement blocks would have to be incorporated into Israel when a final agreement was reached. But there was never any explicit departure from the international consensus, which is that these settlements are unlawful and that they are a breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49. There has never been any serious doubt about that, and the fact that the U.S. expresses a political opinion that they now are legal has no real weight beyond its geopolitical leverage. It has no legal significance.
Let me bring in Ramallah here and Nour Odeh. Nour, what's the Palestinian reaction to this? You've long said, the Palestinians have long said, that this administration isn't a partner for peace. That was echoed by Saeb Erekat in his statement. So is that the case? We're still just going to continue down that line? Or has there been stronger reaction to this?
Well, it's not a partner in peace, but I think we can safely say that it's a partner in crime now. The Trump administration has an ideological alliance with the settler movement in Israel, and that's long been clear for the Palestinian side, who've considered the Trump administration part of the problem since the declaration on Jerusalem shortly after or less than a year after Trump took office. So it was not surprising to see the announcement or hear the announcement from POMPEO overnight, but that didn't make it any less infuriating for the Palestinians on all, on the official and the popular level. I think what's most dangerous is that those who still make the argument and the case for international law in light of a very still timid international reaction will be under fire in Palestine because nobody seems, this agenda of international law doesn't seem to be having much of a backbone or support internationally beyond the rhetorical.
Let me bring in Gideon Levy here in Tel Aviv. Has this handed Netanyahu the government?
Look, directly, I don't think it will have an immediate effect. Netanyahu is struggling now. His supporters will be very happy with this step. The others will not understand it. And I don't think it will have an immediate effect. This will not save him, or this will not bring him to any better place. But we have to see it in an overall view. I mean, the United States administration can declare tomorrow morning that raping is legal. What does it mean? Will it make raping legal in the world? Will it make it moral? Will it make it acceptable? I don't see the point. I totally agree to Professor Falk, my friend, Professor Falk, saying that by the end of the day, we are dealing with an international law. And this American administration has nothing to do with the international law, and therefore it has some political influence both within Israel and outside, but I don't think it has any legal effect.
It may not have any legal effect, but there is, Gideon, an enforcement effect. If one of the most influential countries on the planet says, okay, this isn't illegal anymore, it makes it very difficult to try and enforce the law, particularly as the US was the only partner for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Surely that's the issue.
Yeah, but Imran, you see, it's now 52, 53 years that nobody bothered to implement the law. And Israel could ignore the international law very easily. And by the end of the day, the settlements are there with the approval of the international law or without it. And we have to face it. And we have to face it that the settlements are there to stay. And we have to realize that the days of the two-state solution are gone. And we have to think about a new discourse, namely the one-state solution, which is the only solution left. One man, one voice, one person, one voice. That's the only thing that is remains now. And the resolution of the Americans just enforce it. There is no chance for the two-state solution. We have to realize it.
NOUR in Ramallah, is it time for a one-state solution?
Well, I think regardless of where we stand, whether it's the two-state or the one-state, I think what needs to be done, what we all need to focus on is how these policies and practices of Israel can be made costly for Israel, regardless of what we want to advance. Israel will continue to advance racist policies, will continue to treat 20% of its population, the Palestinian Israelis, as 10th-class citizens. Adding to that, the Palestinians in the occupied territory is not going to change policy unless Israel is compelled to do that. I think in many ways what Trump is doing is forcing the hand of those who still think that laws count for something to defend them, because the implication of what Trump did, or the Trump administration did last night, doesn't stop at the borders of Israel and Palestine. I think it goes well beyond that. And if Trump has his way, he will unravel the international order altogether. If there is seriousness, and if the policies of Israel are made costly, if this occupation, this racism, this colonization is made costly, then talking about a solution, regardless of the formula, will become possible. Otherwise, we will continue to have the status quo of one-state reality, where Palestinians are oppressed, denied basic human rights, denied civil rights, denied their own existence, even, if you will, by many in the now mainstream Israeli political system. And I have to point out, I didn't really see any difference between Netanyahu and Gantz in welcoming the Trump administration's announcement. And that says a lot. It says a lot about a political system that has been emboldened and taken over by the settlement agenda. As Gideon Levy once wrote, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, that's what we have right now in Israel. And unless that changes by policies, by actions from other states, I don't see how talk of any solution is worth any energy.
Well, let's bring in Richard Falk here. It's interesting what NOUR is saying about the idea of other states. Just because the United States, as you've pointed out, has said that this is no longer illegal, it doesn't change the fact that actually under international law, it's still, building settlements is still illegal, and those settlements are illegal. What is the role of other states now, other organizations like the European Union? Is it time for them to step up and try and enforce the laws, or trying to at least get some sort of resolution condemning the US move? What's the international community's next move?
Well, I suspect the next move will be similar to the next move after the US moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. It will, there will be a General Assembly resolution condemning this latest Trump move. And one should remember, one thing that hasn't been mentioned is that Trump often does these foreign policy initiatives for the sake of domestic politics, particularly in view of the election in a year from now. He's thinking of his evangelical and Zionist bases of support. He's thinking of the rich donors like Sheldon Adelson. I'm not sure that there is as much emphasis in his thinking or acting in this way as would be the case with other kind of leaders. International issues come very secondary for him. And it's true, as was said, that he's against any kind of legal structure in international affairs. He withdrew from the Iran nuclear agreement. He torpedoed the Paris climate change agreement. So he is anarchistic when it comes to international order, but I don't think he has any kind of coherent strategy that is tied to this latest outrage that is morally and politically, as well as legally, unacceptable. And I agree completely with what Gideon said, that we're faced now with the reality of which one-state solution is going to prevail. It's not a matter of preference, it's a matter of the reality on the ground. And those of us that favor a legal and moral and even spiritual solution favor a democratic, secular state that treats both peoples equally.
I mean, Gideon, let me bring you in here. The word anarchist was used to describe Trump's policies. I mean, that's a very good word, I think, to use. He often makes policy on the fly. But the policy on the fly that he's making for his domestic audience is very much in the benefit for the hardliners in Israel. So is there a way out of this for the left in Israel, for the moderates? Is there anything that they can look to in this US administration that might give them hope? Or is it just simply, this is it now?
Imran, who are the moderates in Israel? I mean, it was just mentioned that the leader of the so-called moderates reacted exactly the same to the American administration's step, like Benjamin Netanyahu. The real discourse in Israel right now is between extreme right-wingers and right-wingers, between more polite right-wingers and less polite right-wingers. Very little is being left, from the Israeli real left. Very little can be expected from the Zionist left, who tries to eat the cake and to leave it complete, to gain everything from everything, to pay some lip service for peace, for justice, and to do exactly the same steps like the Likud. By the end of the day, we have to realize that Israel as a whole is today very much on the nationalistic, religious, right-wing pole, and the expectations that a peace camp or a change will come from within Israel cannot be met because there is no incentive for any kind of change from within Israel. Life in Israel is so good. Nobody is going to bother about any kind of change, putting an end to the occupation, stopping the settlements, caring about the human rights and the lives of the Palestinians. All those are off the table in Israel, and you see it in each campaign. Nobody speaks about it at all.
Let me bring in NOUR ODEH here in Ramallah. NOUR, there's no Americans anymore for the Palestinians, at least as a peace broker. Doesn't seem to be any real partner coming to the fore. The Saudis are now, sidling up to the Israelis. There are relations between the two countries now. We're seeing other Sunni states actually warming towards this Israeli administration when it actually gets formed again. That's still another thing. But is there a potential Palestinian partner, a peace broker, an honest broker, or are you all out of options now?
No, I don't think that you're ever out of options. I think this is a very critical juncture for the Palestinians. I think overall, this is perhaps one of the most difficult periods we've gone through in decades, given the dismal state of Arab affairs and the fact that countries whose continued leadership or continued existence of the regimes are dependent on the mercy of Donald Trump, who requires good relations with Israel, the situation has become quite difficult. However, I will go back to the idea that was mentioned by Dr. Falk and Gideon Levy. The fact that we might think that things will, all you need is a broker, I think is incomplete. What we need, in my opinion, is an alliance of the like-minded internationally. What is happening right now is a wave, a tsunami of hostility towards rules and regulations and laws. These laws govern a lot more than the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force, which is in the UN Charter. It governs everything from trade to bilateral relations to movement of people, movement of goods. The whole system through which we all operate depends on making sure that it continues to work. We cannot pick and choose from it. And I'm not speaking here idealistically. After all, the two-state formula or the one-state formula, we're not talking about a maximalistic position. I think there's an opportunity for the Palestinians to harness this concern worldwide about the Trump administration and to push for bolder positions from countries, for more courageous positions, if you will. I think countries should take the lead from Ireland, from Sweden, from many countries that have been very clear on where they stand in terms of the illegality of settlements, in terms of what settlement products mean. And we need to see more of those actions. This occupation, these policies of the right in Israel have to have consequences. The occupation has to hurt Israel in order for Israel to do something about it. But right now, as we heard from Gideon Levy, life is good in Israel. Nobody sees the Palestinians. Nobody talks about the Palestinians, and they don't have to.
No, thank you very much for that. We are running out of time, but I do very quickly just want to ask one last question to Richard Falk in Harare. Just very quickly, is there an option for the Palestinians, for the Israelis, for another partner if the US is simply going to take this road? Is there anybody else?
Not at the moment, but I think one thing we can say is that civil society and the BDS campaign and pressures from below are perhaps the most relevant short-term political way to support the Palestinian national struggle. I think diplomacy is really at a dead end. It can have a short-term effect of criticizing what POMPEO and Trump have just done, but it won't change anything fundamentally.
I want to thank all our guests, Gideon Levy, Richard Falk and NOUR, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.